Today we tackle 3 ways to stress less in today's classroom. Episode 726 with Dr. Desiree Alexander. In this podcast, Dr. Alexander tackles 3 of the stressors of teachers today: distance learning, hybrid learning, and digital equity. Dr. Alexander is a 2020 ISTE featured presenter, a digital education top technologist, and has even been selected Teacher of the Year in her district, and many more honors. Let's get started.
Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis.
I want to thank Advancement Courses for sponsoring today's show. Stay tuned at the end of the show to see how you can save 20% on engaging and meaningful professional development from Advancement Courses. So today we're talking with Dr. Desiree Alexander from Educator Alexander Consulting and YouTube channel. And Desiree, you're going to help us not stress out and stress less. And there are 3 areas that we're going to talk about: distance learning, hybrid learning, and digital equity, because these are areas that, in addition to all the sanitizing we're doing in our rooms and everything, which is a lot, that are causing a lot of stress for educators. So how do we start with distance learning? How do we not stress out there?
I think one of the biggest things with distance learning is not trying to use every single tech tool that's out there. There's so many things being thrown at us as educators and so many tech tools that we can be using to help our students, but there's so much out there. So the first thing that I tell my educators is just to breathe and not use every tech tool. Use one thing that you find, use it well, use it into the ground before you add anything else. Because it's just confusing for the educators, confusing for the parents, and it's confusing for the students. So I like to say use the WHO system, and that's just WHO, and that's what do you want to use, how do you use it, and what's the outcome of the usage. So if you look at a tech tool and you say, well, I want my students to produce videos. Okay, well, that's the goal. What tech tool do you want to research? Pick one. There's a million of them out there. Then the second thing is, well, how easy is that tech tool to use? If you can't figure it out in about 5 minutes or watch a quick YouTube video, move on. There's other tech tools out there. And then what is the actual outcome of using it? So if you can't answer those 3 and those 3 don't feel comfortable, then you need to move on.
Is this your WHO system? So I need to credit you for this because that's awesome.
This is my WHO system.
So are you ready to talk about hybrid learning? Do you want to kind of define hybrid learning for those who may not have heard or clearly understand what it is, and then how we can stress less or not stress out there?
Oh, hybrid learning. I think hybrid learning has been redefined and re-edited during this COVID-19 situation. Hybrid learning used to play along with blended learning, and it was a way to use technology in the classroom as well as in-person direct instruction with the teacher. Now it's transformed. Some people are defining it as that, and others are defining it as students are on the computer virtually at the same time that some students are in the classroom. And that is just challenging with all capital letters and an exclamation point behind it.
It's somewhat unrealistic. I mean, we just probably have to say it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But it is reality.
Yes, and we have to try to find sanity within the insanity. Look, if I had the magic bullet for this, I would be a super rich woman on an island. Okay, there is no magic bullet. There is no one solution that's going to help everybody. But one of the things that I'm starting to tell my educators is to create a system and create a routine. So the more that we can create, like, not trying to change the entire world with our 30-minute lesson or 60-minute lesson or 90-minute lesson, and really start to think, like, how can I still positively impact my students? How can I do what I need to do as much as possible, but not drive myself crazy? And one of the ways to do that is to set a routine. So even when we're thinking about lesson planning, that's one of the things that I work with my educators on, is creating a template for your lesson plan to where you're actually just filling in the content every day and every week. And what that does is it not only kind of takes the stress off of you and, everything is everywhere with your lesson, but it also helps your students create this safe space, because if I come to your class and I know what to expect, just something super small, and then I'm more likely to come to your class. I'm more likely to feel safe in that area because I know what to expect.
But we can apply the Harry Wong principles of procedures here, because you've got to have procedures and consistency. I'll tell you, when we did some hybrid, or some people call it high flex, we had class captains. We had 2 class captains, and their job was to advocate for and help those that were online and they were in the physical classroom, because it really almost if that teacher is concentrating on what's going on, they can see the kids in the room, but they can't see the kids that are online, especially if they're streaming on the same computer that has their presentations and content. A recipe for big challenges. It just is.
Yeah. And I tell my teachers, when you're thinking about what needs to change, when you're talking about in-person versus virtual, is the procedures, the classroom management, all of that still has to have a place. All of that still needs to be in effect. You may have to modify it, but all of that still has to happen. What absolutely 100% has to change, especially when we're talking about hybrid and distance, is the instructional piece.
And then on top of this, we've got the digital equity. So you have some kids who have terrible bandwidth, so they don't put on their camera. And then the teacher says, I need you to turn on your camera. But then there's some kids who have great bandwidth who turn their camera off and go play with the dog. So the challenges of digital equity are stressful. So how do teachers stress less as they consider this equity piece that just is breaking so many of our hearts, that kids just don't have access? So how can they all have the same standard?
Well, there are very different levels to digital equity. There is the kind of simplistic of our students don't have devices, right? Something that can be solved with giving them a device if your district has that ability. But there are deeper issues to digital equity. So even the camera issue that you raised, I understand the thought process of I want to see them on the screen, and that's how I can tell that they are engaged. And it's just so very false. Just because you see me on the screen, just because I'm looking at you dead in your eye, does not mean I'm engaged with you. It means I'm complicit. It means I'm sleeping behind my open eyes. It's a falsity. It doesn't mean that I'm with you just because you can see me and I'm just sitting there looking at you. It doesn't mean that I'm actually engaged in the lesson or that I'm getting anything from this lesson. So it's one of those things where we need to think a little bit deeper when we think about digital equity. First and foremost, we really want to take a step back and start looking at, why are we making the decisions that we're making? Why are the districts making the decisions that they're making? We want to start looking at our own bias. We want to start looking at, are we empathetic? There's so much deeper to digital equity than just the surface level of, do our students have devices? And if we look at what can a classroom teacher do, right? Boots on the ground, what can I do if I don't have a voice at the table? If I'm not the person deciding if they have a Wi-Fi bus or if they have a device. Well, what a classroom teacher can do, boots on the ground, if they don't have a voice in the decision making, is start with yourself. So you have to start looking at, why do I feel certain ways? What are my biases? And if anybody out there is listening to this and they're shaking their hand and they're like, well, I don't have any biases, you are wrong. Point blank, period. So taking a step back and looking at that. And what my big thing is when I'm teaching digital equity, my big kind of catchphrase is BDA. Going beyond just looking at your biases and go, oh, I have a biases against that group of people. Okay. But no, what I'm more concerned with, especially in education, is how does your bias determine your actions? That's what I'm more concerned with. Because yeah, we can have biases, but how are you treating your students or other coworkers because of your bias? That's what we need to start pinpointing. Then we can say, okay, why are we making the decisions we're making? What's important about these decisions? Who's at the table making these decisions? Are we being inclusive? Are we being equitable? It just goes so much deeper. So if we talk about me, boots on the ground, classroom teacher, where can I start? That is where we need to start.
And it just feels like so much. It just feels like there's so many ways to mess up.
Mm-hmm. And what I tell my teachers, because I have educators that contact me across the globe about just, how can I be better? I feel so ashamed for something that I did last year. And it's one of those things that I tell my educators, you have to start somewhere. So you need to start today. So let's get rid of the kind of just what you said, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And you will say the wrong thing eventually. You will say something that somebody says, no, that's not okay. The point of that is start today, do better, do your own research to see what don't I know, what should I know. And then when you say something, if a person from that group tells you that that is wrong, you need to listen. Don't talk. Don't say what your intentions were. Listen. Ask questions like, hey, do you mind me asking, what should I have said? What words should I have said for that? When you start building that kind of culture, like, hey, guys, I'm trying to be better. I need you to call me on my stuff. Think about the voice that you are helping your students amplify. Think about the trust that you have to have in that classroom. Just think about the kind of culture that you're going to build in that classroom.
And we all want to get better. I'm committed. I learn stuff every day, and it's not easy. You admit it, and then sometimes people don't let you forget it. And I think that's also hard too.
So 2 things about that. I just want to just very quickly. So 1, if it's hard on you, imagine how it is on them. Okay, so I just want to kind of challenge you with that because I do know it's hard. Like if I sit and I go, oh, it's so hard because I may say something that they may not like. Imagine what they are going through. And that makes me take a step back and say, be quiet. Right? That makes me take a step back and go, you know what? Yeah, it may be hard on me, but imagine what they're going through. So it kind of makes you kind of take the focus off yourself and say, yeah, it's hard, but man, I can't even imagine. And then the second thing is that I tell my teachers, move on from the past, right? Forget the ghosts of the past, start today. But I also say, you cannot force someone to take your apology. So I heard you say that, sometimes I'll say, well, I'm sorry, and they won't accept it. You can't force them to take your apology. Some things cut deep, and we may not understand that they cut deep, but they do. So it's one of those things where actions have consequences. So if you say something and somebody won't accept your apology, the best you can do is apologize and move on, but you can't force people to accept your apology. And that's what I tell my teachers, if you had that child last year where BDA happened, where your bias did determine your actions, there are adults right now that don't want to walk into schools because of situations like that. So those things cut deep and they stay with people. You can apologize, but you can't force anyone to accept your apology.
You can apologize and you can work to rebuild relationships. All you can do is as much as it is up to you to be at peace with others. That's all you can do. And people are beautiful, and every person is a masterpiece. That's the name of my classroom, is Masterpiece Theater. Our hope is that you will not stress out and that you will stress less with this advice from Dr. Desiree Alexander, Educator Alexander Consulting. Thank you, Desiree.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. It's time to plan your professional development now with advancement courses. You can choose from over 280 online graduate-level PD courses in 20 subject areas that are self-paced with up to 6 months to complete. Go to advancementcourses.com/CoolCat and save 20% off each course by using the code COOL20. That's just $120 per graduate credit hour or $160 for 50 clock hours. You can also receive graduate credit through CAEP and regionally accredited university partners for continuing education requirements. Thanks, Advancement Courses, for sponsoring today's show. Never stop learning.